Hello and welcome to today's podcast. Today's guest is Alex Mixter. And as always, during the beginning of the podcast, I turn the mic over to you to just kind of give us a brief background on yourself, what you do, what you like about it, etc., and just kind of go from there.
Sure. Well, I got going as a videographer, and now I'm the project manager on the Lee Mansion restoration, which is its whole kind of evolution, because I was making a whole bunch of videos about the Lee Mansion, just kind of as an activist, and then that moved into realism of what needs to be done to actually secure a building like that. And so through the videography company that I have, I work with a whole bunch of nonprofits, and so I got this wide view of what's happening in Saginaw just through the clients that I was working with. And also doing a documentary about Saginaw made it where I got a really interesting perspective on the town, and then all of those things kind of culminated into the Lee Mansion. And what I like about it is that I get to talk to a bunch of people, and that's my job. Like to just ask questions to people of what are you doing, what are you working on, what do you think, what do you want to see happen, and having that kind of of a fluid discussion with people creates a perspective of sorts. Not gonna say good or bad because it depends who you talk to, I guess.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we're going to jump into your project with the Lee Mansion.
Mm-hmm.
Before we talk about that, can you give us a brief history of what it is for those listeners that aren't that familiar with Saginaw? What it is, where it's located within Saginaw, and a bit of history on it. I know it's referred to as the Cat Lady Mansion.
Yeah.
That's actually how more people... Because I'll tell people that what's going on at the Lee Mansion. They go, the what? I go, the Cat Lady Mansion. Oh, really? Yeah, they don't know that. I didn't know the real name until someone told me what you were doing. I think that's how I found out what the name was. I think it might have been Tom Trombley of the Castle Museum. If you're listening, Tom, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so that house is kind of an urban legend of sorts, honestly. I've been, through being involved with the project, I've been really astounded by how many people have their own personal story with this house in particular. When we actually secured the house, the very first question that I got from the news people was like, why this house? Why does this matter? And I felt like the answer to that is like, well, if you live in Saginaw, you already know the answer to that question of this house in particular has a huge impact on the culture of Saginaw, I think. Not? Yeah. And why not is another thing. I did look at it, but a lot of people knew it because the last owner of the house, Rosemary DeJezero, she owned, over the course of her life, she had 3 leopards and a black panther, and she would walk them around the block and around downtown.
Did she... How long ago was that?
So I believe Chichu, her last leopard, I believe he died in the 90s. So like late 90s, because in 2000 they changed the rules on the fact that you can even have a cat that size. So she was one
exotic animal. Did she keep these inside?
Yeah. In fact, the cage is was in the basement of the house, and it was just a. It was a leopard cage the size of a room, and throughout the whole house, there's all kinds of scratches and things like that. But she owned a whole bunch of cats too, which is how she got the nickname the Cat Lady. But through being involved with the house, researching the house, I've done an amount of research about that thick on my desk right now of just it just keeps going and unraveling. So while people know it as the Cat Lady house, we call it the Lee Mansion because Charles Lee is the man who is the one who built the house, and his story is super interesting. But then the next owner of the house was actually Rosemary's dad, Dr. Ryan, and he was one of the first resident physicians at St. Mary's, and the kinds of things that were associated with the house I find to be really interesting, and I could go on wild tangents in every direction basically for it. But
you can do a part 2.
Sure. Yeah. But the main thing was that people knew this house as the Cat Lady house, and I think it's much more interesting than a lot of cats were in the house, and a lot of people thought the house should be torn down just because of the amount of cats that were in there. And I always get, what do you do about the smell? And there's not really a smell. It's been vacant for so long that the smell just kind of...
The odors, the germs, everything just died.
The windows have been open because they're broken. So, so it's been airing out for all this time. And
I think in when I was in elementary school in the 90s, I went to Kempton Elementary on Davenport in Saginaw. My third grade teacher told us about the cat lady of Saginaw, and I thought they were pulling our legs because they said she had a lion. Did she have a lion? Because I don't think
the lion comes from. I do not believe she had a lion. None of the research I have points to a lion, but she did have lion heads on the front of her house.
Yes.
She was actually
Terracotta.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that came from the old Saginaw News building. That was the building that got replaced by what is now the SVRC Marketplace, but was where they housed the Saginaw News through late 1960s through when they closed that branch. And then she actually got the lion heads. I've heard that they were a reward, but I talked to one of her children actually, and he told me that he was the one who went through the rubble and grabbed them. So the lion heads were very iconic to the house for a lot of people, but now those are in the Castle Museum. We've talked about trying to get those back in the house. The Castle Museum wasn't into that conversation because it's a permanent display for them. But on top of that, the question became, how do we restore the house? Do we bring it back to Rosemary's time, or do we bring it all the way back to Charles Lee's time, which he wouldn't have had the lion heads on there? So it's a question of how do you restore a house like that, and who do you restore it to?
Right. That's a good point. When the houses had multiple owners, what era, what owner, what type of person? I never thought about that.
Yeah, Charles,
especially if you've had two very iconic people.
Yeah, and honestly, Charles Lee was very low key. Actually, I can't even find a picture of him, and he was a prominent lumber baron, and his lumber mills were right on that block. So right where the Lee Mansion is, it was surrounded by a planing mill and a sawmill, and he was the only lumber baron who had the audacity to live next to his mills, and that's why his house is actually burned down multiple times before he built the house that currently stands.
So it wasn't an ego thing; it was a safety thing. It burned down because of the mill, or it was...
Oh, yeah, the mill caught on fire, and then the rest of the block caught on fire.
Oh, okay, so is that
It's
just...
the late 1800s, and everything's burning.
Right. So would other lumber barons purposely build their houses far away for fire safety?
Well, they were loud, they were smelly, they were all kinds of things that they just didn't want to be near, and Charles Lee just lived right in the midst of it. And he was, I guess you could say, one of the mid-tier lumber barons. I mean, if you're a lumber baron, you're making an insane amount of money, and his house kind of displays that too. But he doesn't necessarily have the parks named after him, the streets named after him. But he is, or if you go through the books, he's listed in everything, and he's making a lot of lumber. So,
all right. So Charles Lee, this would have been the lumbering era in Saginaw. Mm-hmm. So about what year was the house built? And then from them, we'll just kind of talk about the lumbering history of Saginaw.
Yeah. So that house was built, I believe, in 1888. And the reason I say I believe is because when you go through the newspapers, that it gets kind of conflicting on what's happening when. But there was a huge fire in 1888 that I mentioned that... one of the newspaper articles that I've read, it kind of ended on a cliffhanger because the library closed right after I found this article. And the last line of the article said that at the time of the press, Charles Lee's house is on fire. But it didn't say it was a total loss, and so I read that and then went to the Lee Mansion.
While they're writing the article, it is burning.
It's actively burning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's right down the street. They could have walked, I guess, but no, So he built the house in the late 1880s, but he came to Saginaw, I believe, in the 1850s or so. I'm not exactly sure on the dates on that, but he came up here and he was in Detroit, as a brick manufacturer for a while. He was originally from England, and so he had a trail basically that made its way all the way to Saginaw, which is where his life ended. And he made his whole fortune in Saginaw, and he apparently made a bid for treasurer of Wayne County at one point. And wow. He didn't succeed, but he ran.
Was this while he was living in Saginaw?
Yeah, that's the part where it gets murky, actually, is because he was living in Saginaw, but he still had like a little bit of business in Detroit.
Okay.
And yeah, he spent the last half of his life at least in Saginaw, and that's where all of his fortune came from.
Okay. So Saginaw was a big lumber town. Before General Motors, before the auto industry, Saginaw was a lumber boom town. Along with Bay City, we competed with, I believe, Muskegon, Kalamazoo. Do you want to talk about the lumbering era for a bit, just briefly? Or?
Yeah, I think it's an important point too, because when we look at the current state of things, it's weird how these types of towns have these waves where because it's usually the original origin of the town is whatever the natural resource is there. And it happened to be timber in this region. But once that went away, you can kind of see this across the country where there's the natural resource and then we deplete it, and then there's the industry and then we deplete it. And now we're in that same kind of thing that we were in the 1890s of, well, we're out of lumber. Like we're not making car parts anymore.
Here? How do we surge?
Yeah. So it's, it was the only place that was bigger than it was Detroit at the time in Michigan. And that was, it's weird because they thought that it was going to last for generations, that we would have all of this timber. And within one generation, they depleted all of the timber.
So was it more so we used more timber or we had less uses for timber?
That's a good question.
That may have been later on in the 20th century. But
yeah, well, I think it was just a matter of we cut down all of the trees that were there to be cut down, and there are these pictures that you can actually find through Hoyt Library of just these stumps, these fields of stumps.
Yep.
And apparently Hartwick Pines is the only place in the state of Michigan that has like the old growth trees that you can actually get an idea of what it was like. These are lumbering era, but not cut down trees. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So these are old trees that honestly would rival what you could see on the West Coast. But it's tragic to think too, because whenever I see the old pictures of the lumbering era, these trees are just enormous and they're 3 men wide, and it's just crazy to think what was there. Yeah. It all just got cut down.
Okay. Well, obviously Saginaw has changed a lot since the late 19th century, and the Charles Lee Mansion has withstood the test of time. The city built up around it. During the 20th century, we experienced the post-World War II economic boom, the baby boom, General Motors, factories. At this mid-century, Saginaw was about 100,000 people, and we're down to 45,000 around there.
I think it's 49 right
49?
now. I think we're teetering. There's going to be the 2020 census that's going to let us know. But one of the concerns actually is when that comes out, we might lose our status as a city, which would eliminate a lot of, or like the grants and funds that are available from the feds that help the city of Saginaw. If we're under that threshold, there are a lot of things we're not eligible for.
Is it 45,000?
I want to say 50, but
50? Okay.
But don't quote me. don't quote me on it.
Either, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's located on Washington Street, downtown Saginaw. Earlier this year, you cut down all the trees, and the it's kind of ironic. You cut down the trees.
Yeah, we cut down the first thing we did.
Not ironic, but it's kind of maybe symbolic.
Yeah, the first thing we did at the lumber baron's home was we cut the trees down.
Honoring Charles Lee by harvesting lumber at his house.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, those were just regular box elders. They weren't. They weren't
nothing they would have really used. Yeah.
They were kind of like the weeds of trees, basically, where they were just popping up, and they were like right at the foundation of the house. When we cut those trees down, it was kind of a strange thing because we realized that it's weird how much blight becomes a part of the landscape. And how when you pass an overgrown house that's just shrouded in trees, at a certain point you forget it's even there. And that was actually what brought a lot of the attention to the house. Was one of the council members just randomly one day said, "Hey, that house that we own on Washington looks horrible. We got to do something about that." His plan for it was to tear it down, and then that's when the movement re-energized basically, because this house was basically slated for demolition since 2011, and then in 2012 there was a huge movement to prevent it. And actually, that was
from what I read. It seemed like I did some research, and it looks like every single attempt was had some backlash from the public.
Yeah. So in 2012, they were kind of flirting with the idea, and then there was this huge movement that countered it, and then it became a conversation of if you can come up with a plan, if you can come up with the financing, and if you can make it happen, we're listening. But otherwise, we're going to have to do something about this. And then from 2012 to 2016, nothing happened. And in fact, it completely dropped off the radar for years. So him bringing it back up brought it to my attention because I moved back to Michigan from Colorado in 2016. So 3 months after I moved home, this is on the news. And so I was working on a documentary of what's currently happening in the city of Saginaw. I said, well, geez, this is a scoop. This is something that's happening. And
it's a lead.
Yeah. And so what happened actually was that in 2016, right after that happened, there was a movement that pushed back that because he said it looked bad, a bunch of volunteers showed up, 25 people or so, cleaned up the house, on the outside. We cut the grass, and we painted the plywood so it was less of a plywood look and more of just a darkened window. And that got some more attention on it. And then there was a realtor who he listed it for months and he couldn't find a buyer. And then by the end of 2017, it was starting to look really grim that, we couldn't find a buyer for the house. And the hard thing for me was, if there's so much attention on this house and if there's so much public support, why can't we find someone to buy the house?
Why can't we move forward? Why can't we jump over this hurdle? And what's stopping us, basically?
And I think anyone who's involved with any kind of a preservation, wanting to prevent a demolition or something like that, the first question you have to ask is, what are the actual facts of why this needs to be torn down? And the problem that we ran into, there are so many people who have restored these houses immaculately within the neighborhood of the Cathedral District. The problem is where this house is. It's on a state highway. So with all of this redevelopment happening in downtown Saginaw, it turned into, well, yeah, that'd be great if someone spent 20 years restoring the house. We don't have 20 years for people to be driving by this blighted out building. So they had a plan of you had to sign a development agreement that said within this amount of time, and it was a relatively short amount of time, you had to do this, and this, which seemed unreasonable. But in the context of a development, it's extremely reasonable. So what would have taken one or two people, 10 years to restore, we've probably gotten, I'd say 5 years worth of work done in half a year.
That's incredible.
We've just been moving really quick, but that's what happens when it's treated as a development as opposed to some guy repairing a house.
And the majority of this work is volunteer. This is just people that want to see it happen.
Exactly.
Which is incredible. It's a true testament of what humans can do if you just do something. Just work together. Really, it's admirable. I mean, there are big, giant development. I mean, too many to be named, not just in Saginaw, but anywhere where it takes years to get off the ground, break the ground, literally.
But seeing the behind the scenes of how the sausage is made on this kind of stuff is really interesting because, I mean, like I said, I started as an activist, let's paint some plywood,
start.
That's a good place to start. But there's, the movements like heart bombing. Have you heard about that type of thing?
Heart bombing, no.
It's when you take a cardboard heart and you write something on it and then you put it on a building you want to see saved. And that is the extent of what people can do. Developers have a completely different capacity. And so I feel like what needs to be a concentration is moving into giving people more capacity to be able to improve the properties around them, because it can't all depend on development like this. But the beauty of what we are doing through this development is that we're involving the community as much as possible. And that's driving our costs down a lot too, because it's our developer has completely waived the development fees. I'm completely working pro bono too, so everyone who's in that house isn't being paid. And it's been amazing to see so many volunteers come through and just
it's a community investment. Not a monetary investment. But
and that's what we wanted it to be, was
investment.
How do we bridge, we knew what we wanted to do from a community aspect, But the problem really was, okay, but do you have the wallet for that? And we had a developer come forward from Ann Arbor who is doing a lot of fantastic work in Old Town, and his track record gave us the credibility to be able to move forward on it. So that bridge between, we want to see this happen, I have the capacity to make this happen, that's one of the things that I'm really interested in seeing solved these days, because there's tons of buildings that need this type of attention. Like we were just talking about the Refke House before this. Yep. That's its own fight now, and that capacity needs to be spread out a bit more so people can actually fight for these buildings. Because it's a brick wall otherwise. If it just
there are whole blocks that need it.
Yeah,
and they're not always hidden, tucked away. A lot of times they're just, like you said, they're in plain sight. You just forget about it.
Yeah,
you just walk by it. It's not really, not even a landmark. It's just kind of just means you're closer to somewhere without even thinking about it.
And that's what cutting down the tree is actually, to go back to a point. I completely lost.
No, that's fine.
But when we cut the trees down, it was like the house got a haircut, and everyone was like, "Who is this?" You know,
it's a good way to put it.
And it just pops now. And so once you take away the trees, now you start to see all the other details of like, well, the roof is shot. So once we got rid of the trees, it's like, well, we got to fix the roof right away. Now that we fixed the roof, it's like, God, those windows aren't looking too good. So there's always this thing you're chasing as you start improving things.
Well,
but
it's like power cleaning your house. Once you start, you can't stop.
Exactly.
At least that's how I am. You find one thing that needs to be fixed. All right, that's fixed. Oh wait, now I just noticed. But that's good. That's how I am with cleaning my house. Once I start, all right, I'm gonna wash dishes, and 4 hours later, my entire house and my car is clean. Which
blinking yourself awake, basically.
Pretty much. All right, so we're kind of going to delve into how you personally got involved, how the Lee Mansion restoration project got off the ground. And then from there, we'll kind of figure out progress and any hurdles you faced.
So it really was through the documentary that I was working on. And I'm still working on that, actually. I premiered it 2 years ago, and it's not done.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
That has been the whole point of that project, was to explore what's happening in Saginaw. And I, very, very early on, like one of the first things I did is I had my friend who worked for the news, actually, just drive me around and tell me, because I grew up in Saginaw Township, and the difference between the city and the township are night and day, completely different places. And so I always find it weird that people can say I'm from Saginaw and it has two different meanings. And so I just wanted him to give me his perspective on it, and he drove me around, and I have a clip of me driving down the road just shooting out the window, and I said, they call it the Cat Lady House, and he's like, yeah, it's the Cat Lady, and like you can hear me being introduced to the house for the first time. So that's really where it started. It's crazy to have that on film, actually, like, given the context.
Unscripted, just completely your initial real
very genuine
reaction.
moment. Like the Cat Lady House. And then it turned into, currently the way that the documentary ends, Saginaw is the name of the documentary, currently the way that ends is, hopefully someone does something with this house, it'd be great to see something so it ended on this optimistic but worrisome kind of note of like, someone ought to do something quick, and that was just a piece of the documentary. And I really got a baptism by fire in preservation, because the first one I did was the Leo Kahan buildings on Genesee, which were two Art Deco buildings that some bricks came off, and then
this is on East or West Genesee?
East.
Okay.
Yeah. So right around the corner, actually, from the Lee Mansion, actually. Yep. And those two buildings, within, it was a fast conversation because they were gone quick, and so we watched those two buildings get torn down. And then the Lee Mansion was next on the block.
Oh, these are across from TV5.
What's going to be the new Delta.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It's now a grass field.
Yeah. It's currently just empty. It could be student housing, but but that was the first time that I really got involved with anything preservation related, because we made a video called Brick by Brick that I was interested in the fact that to repair it was going to cost like $100,000. To tear down the block cost like $350,000. And they went with the tear down the block. And that just baffled me, because it was like, all right, come on. like that math just doesn't add up, but it turned out to be that
like the easy way out, or
yeah,
just like what?
To me, I see it as just a very pessimistic viewpoint of like, well, we put this money into it and then we got to do more stuff. But really, because it was owned by the county land bank, that they should have been preserving these properties and repairing them as things happened, as we move into this new era where you go to downtown Detroit and all of the old buildings are getting fixed up now. So you think about that trickling up, I-75, eventually we're going to want these buildings, and I think we're getting there quickly. But that was the first preservation fight where I watched those get torn down, and that feeling sticks with you when you watch a perfectly fine building get chipped at with a crane, and then going through the Lee Mansion and realizing that the problem was really that the wallpaper was peeling and it looked bad and it was overgrown and the roof was bad, so the leaky roof and everything was just constantly bleeding it. And it just turned into this, okay, so what do we got to do? And like having that in mind of the Kahan buildings of like, okay, so we learned a lot about what kind of conversation needs to take place. But after we weren't able to list it and get rid of it that way, I directly approached at the time he was the mayor pro tem, but now he's the mayor, Floyd Clark. And he guided me through the whole thing of like, here's how the city looks at it. Here's how you need to frame your argument. And then I went to the city in March of 2018 and said, this is the concept that I have for the house. And they said, we like it. It needs legs. And then I spent 3 months. They said, we won't tear it down for 3 more months. Basically threw the ball at me. It's on you. Yeah, they gave me an extension. They were ready to tear it down, and there was even a city council meeting where he said, we're kicking the can down the road. What are we going to do about this?
A Band-Aid? Anyway, or kicking the can down the road is a better way to say it.
Yeah. Like he was just, it's been such a long conversation. What are we doing about that house? And the mayor went to bat for me saying, like, we got this guy who's working on it right now, and we're going to see what happens. He's got a timeline. And then in the 3rd month, I got connected with our developer, Alex DePerry, and it was 3 months of this fight trying to figure out how to make it work, and then a 10-minute phone call with Alex, and it was like, all right, cool, well, let's do this. And
that was easy.
Yeah, and then we got keys to the house, and then we just kind of started looking at what needed to be done, and then they said it was going to cost about $1 million to repair. Our budget's $150,000. And so you see the difference in what people think it's going to be and then what it scales down to actually being. And then we just got moving. We just started on clearing the house out because it's just full of all kinds of stuff. So we cut the trees down and all that. But it was weird to go from, not knowing anything about this house to that house is actually the reason why I bought a house just down the street from the Lee Mansion. And I'm 0.2 miles away from the house, and I love the neighborhood. I love everything that's going on there right now. And it all happened just because of this curiosity of like, okay, so what needs to happen? What actually needs to happen? When you ask that question, it's way different than, don't tear it down, you idiots. The whole conversation just shifted. But yeah.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
So how's progress going in the house? I know there's a lot of big volunteer bases from what I've seen on your social media pages, which we'll talk about later. The very first day we had a crew that was just as big as the one that showed up to clean out the outside, and we cleared out this one room that I didn't even know there were windows in the room because there was stuff stacked so high. So we started in the basement and just kept moving one room at a time and one job at a time. And right now, we're getting into a position where plumbing is looking like it's about to happen. We got electricity to the house so we can plug lights in. We saw the Christmas tree in the window.
Yeah. Well, that was actually kind of a funny story because with the Christmas tree, the December before I got assigned to the 3 months to make it happen, we were just rogue preservationists just trying to get attention on the house. And so we came up with this concept called Light Up the Lee, where we were just going to put Christmas lights on an abandoned house, and then we were going to fire up a generator, and then that was like our plan. And the generator didn't work. It just wouldn't fire up. But we had cookies and a bonfire and coffee and hot chocolate, and it was like a fun night. And it just didn't go the way we planned. But then this year we actually got to plug the lights into the power outlet in the Lee Mansion, which was really satisfying.
How long has it been since you were able to do that, probably?
Like electricity?
Like actually into the house, not just a generator. Decades?
Yeah, I mean, the last ownership was in the mid 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's been vacant for, I think, we don't know exactly when Rosemary moved out, but that time frame is in the mid 2000s somewhere. So it's been about 10 years since there's been lights on in the house. Wow. And so we wanted to put a Christmas tree up there just to say, hey, someone's home. Something's happening with this. A lot of people, and a lot of people don't even realize that we are doing a restoration. And there are preservationists who didn't believe for the longest time that it was actually happening. So we would, I'd really excitedly tell, people updates, and they're like, it's gonna fall apart somehow, because people are so hurt or by all the things we have lost over time that
it's hard to
becomes difficult to trust.
A city like Saginaw that is. And really, a lot of places in the Rust Belt in general have just lack of people, lack of industry, lack of infrastructure, have just either torn things down or just kind of waited for them to fall.
Yeah.
And then, it's too late. It's already knocked down, But
And that's the worst thing, is the fact that a lot of the time you just have to wait for it to cave in on itself. And I think that was part of the strategy for a long time of how we were going to handle these things. And to me, it's done a huge disservice to the entire millennial generation, because I'd say about 80% of our volunteers are under 30. A lot of people coming through who had no idea that we have this type of architecture. People don't realize that there's Albert Kahn buildings in Saginaw. There's all kinds of things that an entire generation that grew up in Saginaw Township has no idea about, because everything has been don't go to the east side, and don't just for your own safety and everything. Yeah.
I actually grew up in the city of Saginaw.
Sure.
I never lived in the township.
Mm-hmm.
Although I was school choice till I met you.
Yeah.
High school.
Yeah.
Some kids didn't believe I lived in the city because I wasn't, ghetto.
Sounds crazy.
Yeah. What? You live where? Yeah. What are you doing there? You gotta move. I'm like, I live in a good neighborhood.
Right.
Which I grew up in Adams Boulevard, which you lived for a time.
I did,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, beautiful neighborhood.
Yeah, about 2 years, yeah.
I lived in the west side of the city. My mom at the time had an office in Old Town, and even 10 years ago I was told, you're in Old Town, which even in the last 5 years, Old Town has just blossomed. And they keep opening up new businesses. It's just more and more people start moving down. Apartments have opened up, and it's really cleaned up and beautified, which I think is kind of where downtown is right now. Mm-hmm. They're starting to get there. I've always thought it was beautiful. Yeah. But it's starting to really come back. There's more people on the streets. There's great bars. Mm-hmm. Delta College is going to be expanding. My other employer, Delta College, is going to be expanding down there. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to be opening by fall, from what I read.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, they're moving quick. I drive by it every time I drive home.
and it's, that's right. You live right there.
Yeah, but it's it's moving along so quickly. But to your point about Old Town, though, the developer we're working with is responsible for a lot of those projects, and his philosophy
going back even like a decade or
I think he's been the last half decade. I'm not exactly sure when he got going.
The last 5 years it's really got.
There's been some rapid fire stuff, but a lot of the court in Michigan.
Yes.
He's done these projects that he has proven. Like the thesis statement that I had for my documentary, which was that if you give young people a place to do things and to explore a trade and explore a craft, that's how towns blossom. You give young people an opportunity in an affordable space, because they're usually drowning in debt, and having that capacity to just do something that's theirs and that they can own. He's provided these all these spaces, and sure as heck, you get the salon, you get the hair salon, you get a cobbler, you get a tattoo parlor, you get a sign shop, you get a bread shop. All of these things that have popped up have just been from taking a space that was neglected and then turning it around and making it affordable for young people, and then that is just doing all of the work in Old Town, in my opinion.
When you have a core that bleeds out to the neighboring neighborhood.
That enthusiasm,
that brings in
too.
Outsiders, which is great, because people inside can have great ideas, but sometimes you need an outsider to help.
You have a
with
lot
the
of people
blossom.
coming home, actually. Like the bread guy
Yes.
who just opened up in Saginaw, he came
That's
home.
a European-style bakery?
Yeah, he spent some time in France and then came home
Cool.
and said, why don't we have this here? And then, he took another space that everyone thought was going to be torn down, the old hamburger hut, renovated that, and then now it's a bakery. And he's slammed, and he's doing insanely well. And it's just so interesting to see that happening in Old Town and then to see the trickle into downtown. Because that's the original history of Saginaw right there, is it was two cities.
Yes.
And
Old Saginaw City and East Saginaw.
yeah, and the old one was first.
Yes, yeah.
Old Saginaw City was the first one, and then it became too expensive, and so Norman Little in like the mid 1800s moved over to the east side and turned a swamp into one of the biggest,
At the time, one of the...
like at the time one of the biggest commercial districts in the state.
We were second largest to
Yeah.
Detroit at one time, yes, which a lot of people still don't believe.
Yeah, and there were lumbermen who were making money that was the fortune was only rivaled by Henry Ford, and like that type of wealth was demonstrated through the architecture of the city, and that is my biggest fascination, is the architecture, because there are these amazing spaces that need to be utilized by whoever's in proximity of them. I think that we try too hard to create like a tourist attraction out of a city and try to attract people to come from outside instead of empowering the people who are currently there. And I think that is the key to everything in Saginaw, is just providing the spaces, not just for young people, but for people of lower means, like the people who have the idea
And the people
and
that
just
have
need
been
the
there
space.
for
Yeah.
years.
Yeah,
Would
and that's
love
a
to see it come
huge
back.
portion of the conversation too. Like, how do you empower who's already there instead of trying to attract, people who... The whole gentrification conversation kicks in from there, because there are people there who can use these spaces very well, and I think we would do well by ourselves by just empowering that and just allowing that to flourish, basically. Yeah, and that's
Yeah, there's a lot you could say to that.
yeah. I stopped there because it's a can
So
of worms.
what are the future plans, or maybe the final product of the Lee Mansion restoration? Once it's restored, is it going to be a workspace? Do you want to sell it as just an actual house to live in, or do you have plans to?
Yeah. So the project of the Lee Mansion is kind of it's a culmination of everything I've worked on over the last 3 years through my own business with Hound Lab, of working with nonprofits. I've realized that there are so many organizations that just need a space to exist. And this goes back to the same conversation of there are people who can't necessarily afford a space that's even $500 a month. So the bedrooms we're converting into offices, so people can have an office in a cool Victorian house. And then the exact same thing's happening in the basement, because that used to be a doctor's office, and it was also a lawyer's office for years. So the basement's already been utilized in this office, kind of a function. And the front door to the basement actually has a sign on it that says waiting room, because that's where the waiting room was for the doctor's office. And throughout the basement, there's these squares of windows that have lights behind them, and that's where he put his x-rays. And there's all these interesting little features throughout the basement that give it a ton of character, where I've been in meetings where they said, like, you're going to try to rent out the basement? It's like, if you're looking at it from the blueprint or the floor plan, it seemed like, okay, the basement of this old house. But if you look at it for the house and what it is, it's actually a really, really cool space. But the thing that I'm most excited about is having something on the first floor that can be utilized by anybody. So we want to have more of a community meeting space. I feel like we need more spaces to be able to just congregate. And we want the Lee Mansion to be something like that. There's no place that you can get anything that's positive related to Saginaw in terms of like a gift shop or something like that, but not necessarily a gift shop. But just getting a t-shirt that just has the Saginaw logo on it is very difficult in Saginaw. And we want this to be that spot that you can just go to, and that will all support the house. But it's primarily nonprofits and smaller organizations who pay the rent. And then on the first floor, that's more of like an open to the public kind of space, where what changed my mind was one of my friends, Kevin and Bill, they restored a beautiful Queen Anne that...
Two of your friends.
Two of my friends, yeah. Well, yeah. but they did such an amazing job on that restoration. And the concept for the Lee Mansion came to me when I was house sitting for them. And I was just in the dining room talking with, one of my friends, and it just all kind of clicked together of like this space, this house. They're the ones who introduced me to what happened with the Kahan buildings. They're the ones who brought me into the preservation movement. And you get hooked by it by seeing the potential of a space that was caving in turned into something amazing. And that transformation, I think, is the embodiment of Saginaw as a whole, of this house that everyone's been ignoring for all this time, is getting new life, and it's going to be something really awesome when it's done, and it's going to be beautiful when it's done. But I want more people to be able to experience what I went through at Kevin and Bill's house, which was like, look at this place. Like, I grew up in a house that was built in 1979, and there's just no character to it. I love it because it's my childhood home, but
you have a connection to it, but there's not a historical timepiece.
Yeah.
A truly...
I realized why I hated Saginaw so much growing up. And it was because of these bland spaces. Yeah, the only thing that you can really do for fun is walk around Walmart. And what kind of light? Like, no wonder we bleed children.
I think Saginaw's actually gotten better than that, because I remember those days, which weren't that long ago.
But it's
oh my gosh.
But it's happening so fast too that I feel like this moment is just fantastic. And
this is pivotal right
now.
Yeah,
and I want the Lee Mansion. Like, we have these huge developments that are happening. Like, we've got the Delta College campus, like you mentioned, and like the SVRC marketplace. Like, these millions of dollars just being poured into downtown. And yet I want the Lee Mansion to kind of serve as its own, like, it's more of like a metaphor to me than it is like a crazy investment of like millions of dollars being poured into something. But instead, it's just this very simple transformation that I think speaks volumes to the entire city at large. And I want it to continue to serve that function of introducing people to like reimagining what Saginaw actually is, because I know the perspective that a lot of people have for it, because that's why I left Saginaw to begin with. But I want to try to spread that idea of what brought me back and bring more people back, and also to be a support network for everything that exists on the east side too, and how many organizations exist doing incredible work. How do we empower that? How does this house help to serve as that point of access where if you want to help, you show up at the Lee Mansion and say, I want to help, and they say, what do you like? And then you can just join an organization from there. So that's kind of the high level thinking of it, of like more of the headspace behind it,
networking, but also actually getting past just networking and doing something.
Yeah. And I want it to be more of that hands-on. Like, that's why we want volunteers to help out, is because if you like, you have so much more of an investment in something when you get involved with it. And I feel like way too often we have a passive attitude towards how we look at our cities, of just it's not doing anything for me. It's like, no, you put the sweat equity in, and then you reap from the city. But you can't just take and take and take and take. You have to give something too. And I was just taking before I left, and then when I came back, I wanted to give a little bit more, and that was a lot of what got me involved as well. Is just that work of doing the Lee Mansion. I'm a videographer, but I'm learning how to drywall ceilings, and I'm learning how to do all this other work.
Skilled labor.
Yeah, but it's way satisfying to clean the room, to patch the hole, to pull up the floors. Doing those jobs is extremely satisfying, and I didn't realize that until I got in over my head with it.
But you're enjoying it, so it's not really in over your head, but not bad.
You don't work a day in your life if you. What's the expression?
If you love what you do, find what you love, and you won't work a day in your life. Something like that.
Bingo. Yeah.
There you go.
But we work every Saturday.
Okay. So, last few questions. So where do you, looking at time frame? Where do you see? How long of a process do you see this as being from right now?
That's kind of the funny thing about it.
Debatable, or
well, no, we're moving way faster than I thought.
Okay,
we're looking at being open by late spring 2019.
Oh,
yeah, and
a few months.
Yeah, a few months out, which is funny because I mean, again, all the myths we're busting through this house is it's going to be $1 million. No, it's $150,000. Oh, well, it's going to take forever. Nah, it's going to take less than you thought. And like the whole development plan that they had, that whole development agreement was a year, and we're going to be done within a year. And that was like the things in that agreement were like the roof, the windows, the porch, the lawn, those types of things. But we're looking at a full restoration by the spring. And it's mainly because of the volunteers we've had too, is people who are coming in, helping out, and taking a huge load off the shoulders of the tradespeople who we hire.
Would you say the volunteers have really helped to speed up production?
I think so. Yeah. Just that one day when we had 25 people on site clearing out one room, and like there have been jobs that 2 weeks ago I made a post to Facebook that said I need like 5 people to come help me out with this thing, and what I thought was going to take all afternoon took an hour, and it's just it's amazing to have the extra hands on deck who can just make things happen quicker, and then that we clear the space, and then the tradespeople don't have to do all that. So if we pull the ceiling down, which is less
you have to pay them, which is less work for them to do.
Exactly. But if we pull the ceilings down, they can just go in and run, plumbing or HVAC and all that. But it's just this nice little, symbiotic relationship between like the tradespeople and the volunteers. So we're creating jobs and also like helping those people who are doing those jobs by through volunteer work. Yeah,
it's great. It sounds really rewarding and exciting. I've been bad. I've been telling you I'm gonna come out and help, and I haven't. Coincidentally, every weekend I've had something to do. I know a few months ago I was moving.
Weekends are miserable. Yeah,
they really are.
Yeah, but like for me, it's just become a commitment of like. It's my therapy, honestly. Like even if there are days when nobody shows up, it's just really sad. Like I got to knock a wall down by myself, and it was just like. It feels good.
Yeah, it feels good by yourself. You do something by yourself. Plus you get to be in the house and kind of absorb it by yourself. It's gotta be kind of a surreal thing to be in.
Yeah. One of the big questions I get is usually about ghosts and stuff like that. And it's funny because I feel like I've built like a really good rapport with anything that may be there, because I have had some weird experiences that like things have happened, but I've never had a bad vibe in the house. I've never had a moment where I felt like, oh, this is really creepy. It's just this, like I feel like the original owners are there with me, and it's, when you look at it as more of the original owners are home, it's a lot nicer than like, ooh, it's a very different conversation.
Stop. Well, why would they, if there are spirits there, I don't see them as being, I'm a believer in the paranormal, but I don't think they would be mad.
No.
How dare you remodel my once nice home?
See, and that's another thing that Kevin and Bill taught me actually too, is the respect they have for the family that lived there, and to realize that it is someone's home, and that
the Warfarth house, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Wolfarth, yeah.
Wolfarth, okay.
That, like, to have that level of respect for it, and I'd have these moments too. In fact, the very first time I had any kind of like a paranormal account or like any kind of activity like that was when I realized, like through cleaning up, that I was in someone's home. Like there were just like some items that I grabbed and was about to throw away, and it just felt like this is like it was a comforter,
right?
And like I can just picture someone warming themselves with it, and it's just this thing on the floor that's dirty. And I made a remark out loud to myself by my house, or completely by myself in the house, like to the family. And then just the dynamic of the house shifted, the tone of the house shifted, and then like the doors that were usually open closed, and then like these weird small things that like I know the house inside and out. I know what's open. I know
letting
what's
know in a subtle way that we're here, but you're not unwelcome.
Yeah,
kind of just
exactly. Hi, we're here too.
Thanks, really. Yeah,
yeah, and I guess this is the weirder end of it, but like I've gone to the graves of the people who lived there and visited in that level, and just treating it at
one step further.
Yeah. Like treating it at that level, I think is a really fascinating thing, because it is. Like I think about the house that I grew up in. In 100 years, it'll be like, oh, it's a beautiful 1970s house. But like, for the time being, yeah,
looks like every other house on the street.
But all the memories that I have to that house, and all the things that I associate with it, and to know that house means a lot, not just the people in the community who knew the people who lived there, but also the people who did live there, and their interaction with the house and the love they put into it. I just feel like I'm the next person, and like in the life of the house, I've heard about the restoration in the 60s and the 50s, and now it's it's our turn of like we've got to do the work, And I find that to be like a very humbling task, and I get a big kick out of it.
So we're gonna end this talking about maybe if listeners are interested in volunteering or helping out for any reason, where can they find more information? Maybe on you or the Lee Mansion itself, social media, any web pages that you want to talk about?
So the main thing is through the Facebook page, which is / Charles Lee Mansion. And then it's at Charles Lee Mansion on Instagram, which is a lot more of, I kind of change what gets posted on each. So through the page on Facebook, it's a lot more of here's when we're going to be here, here's what we're working on. And then on the Instagram page, it's a lot more here's what's happening right now. And so like the Instagram stories and stuff, a lot more of that than posts, just to kind of give people more of a day-to-day look of what's happening at the house. And then other than that, resaginaw.com is another thing that that was the original platform for the Lee Mansion, but that's also the trailer to the documentary is there, and we're probably going to relaunch the movie in the spring of 2019 too, which we have to rework the ending now because it ends on a...
Okay.
It's a spoiler, but
okay.
It ends on a more positive note now.
Where is the showing going to be? Do you have a...
I'm working on the Temple Theater right now.
Okay.
I want to do a whole event downtown that is just a pure celebration of all the organizations that are featured. The movie is the mission statement is actually a quote from Mr. Rogers, actually, because he made a comment about whenever he'd see something scary on TV, like his mom would always say, like, look for the helpers. There's always people helping. And that was the ethos of the entire film, of just like, we're not going to talk about the most violent city in America. We're not going to talk about General Motors. In fact, that's a joke in the movie where he says, and then General Motors, well, we shouldn't get into that, and then we don't get into it. Like, because it's just such an overdone conversation that
don't beat a dead horse.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many films that have done such a great job of highlighting all of that. And what this concentration is just looking at the good stuff and looking at who's helping, who's in the trenches. I don't want to talk about it from from the top down or like looking at it from bird's eye view, but instead I want it to be like a block to block view of here's what's happening in these neighborhoods, here's what's happening around here. We go from Old Town to downtown, and then around in the downtown area too, and just kind of look at who's doing what kind of work's being done, and what the bright side of the whole situation is. And that ethos is also bleeding into the Lee Mansion now, of just you start realizing like cat lady house is kind of derogatory in a sense. It paints a negative picture.
I never thought of it as derogatory, but it was...
If you're not from Saginaw and you don't know about the leopards, you just hear cat lady and you think cat pee smell, and you're not going to want to go there.
Oh, yeah.
So
exotic Catwoman.
Yeah, exotic Catwoman is a great... Yeah, large cat owner house. But that is just like the whole attitude of the house is just, we are looking at, you can look at the house and say, it looks like it's too far gone, or you can say, did you see the gable on that house? Like, did you see the trim in there? And like, you can walk through. Yeah, all the little details are incredible in there. And it's a lumberman's home, and all of the wood came from his mill across the street. And so there's really
he built his own home.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Wow.
And
perks of being a lumber baron.
Yeah. And he built a brick house that was, strong as hell because it can withstand a fire, basically. Which with his last house is burning down and everything, but yeah, that's we're at the house every Saturday too, from 10 o'clock till it gets dark, until we're out of things to do, and there's never a shortage of things to do. We try to keep it to where people can come unprepared, and we the only thing we request is that you wear clothes you're comfortable with getting dirty, and you wear shoes that are appropriate for a job site, because it's a job site right now.
Might step on something, might get dirty, who knows.
Yeah.
Okay, before we end this, is there anything else you want to bring up or talk about or give a shout out, mention?
I just want to thank everybody who's helped out. I mean, this project, one of the big things that was misreported out of the gate when we announced that we were going to restore the house is because we're working directly with, we're working with the city of Saginaw right now because they currently own the house. And when we announced that we were restoring it, people were under the impression that it was being done with money from the city of Saginaw, and they are not spending $1 on the project, and it's all been volunteer, with the exception of the things that only a skilled tradesperson can do, like electricity and stuff like that. We're not gonna trust volunteers to just rewire the house, but it wouldn't have been possible without all the people who helped out, and I'm forever indebted to them, and we want this to be a project that they can come back to and say, hey, I helped out with this thing, and I think that's a fantastic thing. Yeah.
Well, all right. If you're interested in learning more about the Lee Mansion, just go to the websites and social media handles that Alex mentioned. They're always taking volunteers, and it sounds like you won't be lonely. A lot of people might meet someone. You don't know. All right. That wraps up today's podcast. Thanks for tuning in.